NATO doing in Georgia? This is where things really went awry. It is official U.S. doctrine. It's surprisingly official, by the way, because you can find it in many, many documents, that the U.S. goal is to be the dominant power in all parts of the world. To my mind, no thanks. That doesn't make me feel any safer. It just means endless wars when 4.1% of the world population presumes that it's going to dominate the world. But this, I believe, was part of U.S. foreign policy at the core already for decades. And NATO enlargement is part of this. There's something particular about Ukraine. It is 2,000 kilometers of border with Russia. It is, from Russia's point of view, a direct security risk to Russia. I would take the same view as a Russian, and I would take the same view as an American vis-a-vis Russia. I actually don't want Mexico to have a military alliance with China. I don't want Mexico to have a military alliance with Russia. And I don't want the United States to have a military alliance with Ukraine for the same reasons. It doesn't make the world safer.
If NATO expansion was one of the main causes for the decision by Russia to invade Ukraine, because, of course, of the fear that it might be a similar situation as we had with the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62, that NATO missiles would be deployed there. However, there have been several proposals since 2008. There was the Bucharest summit when NATO promised Ukraine and Georgia would become NATO members, but not later than 2014 for a neutrality of Ukraine. So neutrality defined no NATO membership, but at the same time the withdrawal of Russian-supported militias in the east. So could have a neutral Ukraine avoided the war? Why was it discarded? Of course, since 2019, we know that Ukraine has the NATO membership in its constitution. Before 2008, there was some forth and back independence, neutrality, NATO membership. But not later than 2005, NATO membership was an aspiration by Ukraine. So if Ukraine would have defended or presented a credible neutrality, could the war have been avoided?
Of course, it could have, and Austria's history is a glorious demonstration of the success of neutrality. Austria was not threatened in the years from 1955 onward by being a non-NATO neutral country. Austria regained its sovereignty and the Soviet Union went home. And incidentally, the Soviet Union went home in 1955 because not only was the state treaty signed in the Belvedere agreed and the neutrality declared by the parliament of this country, but also the Soviet Union was saying to the United States, do this for Germany and the Cold War ends. Make Germany neutral. What is this NATO business? This is a threat to us. Germany claimed 20 million lives of our citizens. Why are you rearming Germany? And our greatest statesman, practitioner of the day, one of our great historian diplomats in modern history, George Kennan, said at that moment, use the Austrian example. Have a neutral Germany and tell the Soviet Union, go home, out of Central Europe, out of Eastern Europe. Now you don't need that buffer zone because Germany is neutral. The United States would have nothing of it. The United States has never believed in it. You were lucky. They weren't paying attention. But for Germany, no way. We were going to have NATO. The end of the 1950s, Eisenhower even said, give them nuclear weapons. That's okay. And that is why, in a series of horrible events, we nearly arrived at nuclear Armageddon with the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States has a very hard time thinking through the eyes of anyone else. And when I say US, I'm meaning literally a small group of a few hundred people. I'm not speaking about the American people. They're not told anything about this. And just as a footnote, I've tried to explain the role of NATO in this to the New York Times, and they will not print anything on this. They've written 26 editorials since February 24th, 2022, that this is an unprovoked war. I called them, I wrote to them, I said I've advised all these leaders, these countries, I've been through this for 3 decades. Can you give me 700 words? The answer is no. There's a complete unwillingness to have any discussion about this. Because if you do, you're put on Ukraine's blacklist and you're put on America's no-show list in the mainstream media. It's really quite something. One more thing that's worth everybody understanding. This is not about Democrats and Republicans. This is not at all about partisan politics. Biden is no different from so many other presidents. It's not, this one's crazy, this one's not crazy. They're all a little bit, but this is about really state policy in the deepest structure in Washington. And it's the armed services committees, it's the very $900 billion military budgets. You have to test your weapons, believe me. You need wars, not so infrequently. You have to be ready. You have to teach China a lesson. In the minds of this small group, this war is as much about China as it is about anything else. Isn't that surprising? It's hard to think the way they think, but you cannot actually discuss this in the United States right now, in the mainstream. Of course, there are 1,000 outlets to discuss things, but not in the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, MSNBC, CNN. Forget it.